Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Google Hangout on Class 2, Week 2 of Early Sacred Music.
That's right. We're going to be talking about Jerusalem today.
There's a small topic.
Yes. Wow. When you're talking about history, when you're talking about the history of the world, Jerusalem seems to be right there as a key.
Yeah.
And it looks like you guys had a great time heading over there, and I loved your videos, by the way.
Thank you. It was we were very fortunate to get the opportunity. You know, it's something that people think about doing their whole lives.
Yeah.
And it is sort of a lifetime goal, and we did get this opportunity. It came really through one of my first opportunities with Smithsonian to be in that part of the world, and so we took that opportunity. And then, of course, we were very fortunate in the assistance we found in our wonderful, and I'm sure you got to all of our Circle of Scholars people will have gotten to know him with Yuval Eden, who, of course, is sort of the star of the show this week, isn't he?
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about that. How did you find Yuval?
Oh boy, you know, as frustrated as we get with all this technology, and I'm sure everybody has his or her version of that several times a week, it's also the greatest way of bringing people together. And we were looking for someone who would be extremely personable on camera, which he is, and in person as well, obviously, and who would be so smart and so interested in being a teacher for the time we had there to see what we could see. You know, time is always limited, and Jerusalem is not Chicago, and you really need assistance figuring out how to see what you need to see and film what we tried to film in a short amount of time. And I'll just have to say that was probably one of the most interesting days of my life, the time we had with him. I mean, starting very, very early, and ending very, very late, because he just was so on board with this. So if our Circle of Scholar students feel a lot of enthusiasm from him watching the clips that we've incorporated, you're not making that up. He was just passionate as a teacher. He wanted everybody to be there. He wanted to explain everything.
Wow. Well, he's right there on the Mount of Olives, right?
Yeah, we started, and you know, it's my first time to be in Jerusalem. We can all read, we look at the maps, all that is very helpful. And he started us off pedagogically. We did it so smartly because we'd already had some time before we met with him to be through walking and going on our own through the old city, which again, I'm sure a lot of people have done, but we had not, and that was a revelation, going through the city gates. And we can talk about why it was such a revelation to me personally, and maybe other people will have had that same experience. But so by the time we met with him, we had some sense of orientation, but it's not the same as somebody who literally knows every inch of that place.
Yes.
So at any rate, yeah, we started Mount of Olives. Yeah, except there you go. There's the first impression. You know, I mean, I don't know how it strikes everybody else, but when we read all this history, it just seems so mammoth. You know, Jerusalem, Mount of Olives, right? I mean, it's massive, right? It feels massive. It sounds massive. When you get there, it's not. One of the first things he did was point out the city of David, and I don't know, what's your impression, Paul, when you think of the city of David? When you just think of it, you know, what comes to mind?
Well, obviously, I mean, I think of David and him establishing the area.
Do you feel sort of a sense of grandeur, and you think, oh, you know, gates, and you know, and I'm sure it was very nice, you know, but it's tiny. He was pointing at this hillside, you know. Now, of course, we're in. You know, our sense of geography is so much bigger, especially in this country, in the United States. But he's pointing to basically a hillside, and I keep thinking, you know how when you're with somebody, you think, "Am I missing this? Am I?" He said, "Now there's your boundary, and there's your boundary, and there it is." And I couldn't believe. I mean, it's small. It's a hillside. I mean, we've got malls that are bigger than the city of David would have been, of course. And I don't mean to be light about this, but I was just astonished to see how compact. And it just made me have to change my whole sense of distance. And that applied through every single thing we did. And I'd have to say, if somebody said, what was your strongest impression the first time to go to Jerusalem, it was the nearness, the intimacy of the entire area. The distance between the Mount of Olives, between Gethsemane to, you know, I mean, everything was just right there. Does that make any sense? It's sort of shocking.
It seems like there's a lot to be gained by understanding the layout of Jerusalem. Anything else, you know, other than to see how small the city of David is there anything else that we can gain by learning the layout as we did in these videos?
Well, of course, so many things have not changed. I mean, things are where they were, you know, and that's always part of the anytime we go to any place historical and we still see the structures, and you think, how much has life changed? Of course, we see a lot of I mean, Jerusalem is not a simple place. It's a place with tremendous tension, and that's another reason it was so glorious to be with him, because we were everywhere. We went everywhere about, it seemed like, but you know, very carefully, and he was pointing out so many things. But back to the question, I think one of the things that's very shocking, and I think it comes out, is the noise level, which would have been loud in its day, from the marketplace. You know, the marketplace and the animals braying, and you know, there was lots and lots of ambient noise. But now the traffic noise, somehow when you think Jerusalem, do you think of buses? And the Garden of Gethsemane is, of course, tourist buses, and is you kind of like, is there any way to recreate the sense of peace? I think I asked him that. He said, yeah, if you come here at, you know, 2 in the morning, maybe. It's a loud place, and maybe it was loud, relatively speaking, in the ancient world, but it's just filled with activity and transportation, and it makes it a little more challenging to feel a connection to the world of Jesus.
Wow. Well, what do we gain by understanding more about the basic history as defined by the first temple, Babylonian captivity, the second temple, etc.?
Well,
and then, of
you
course,
know,
the
one of the things we're
destruction of
hoping
the
this
temple.
unit does, and our goal in everything we try to do, is to yeah, there you go. But you know, don't we? Most of us, we learn this history. What we learn it in Sunday school, right? Or we learn some of it in school. We learn it in Sunday school, but it's hard to put it in order. It's hard to get a coherent sense of what really happened. And I would really encourage everyone, if you haven't done it, maybe you've done it. Probably you've done it in your family, Paul, because I know how seriously you all study. To have a timeline. For me, trying to get this straight would be to get the sense of when those temples existed and when they were destroyed, and of course in the case of the first temple, rebuilt, and then the one that we see in the graphics today, in the 3D reconstructions, which we have in the assignment for everybody to watch, and I think they are amazing, is to realize that that temple of Herod, and I think you've all pointed out, was so much more extravagant than what was there before he expanded it. He turned it into this just astonishing, wealthy, you know, elegant, massive, and it is massive, relatively speaking. And that's not the temple that that first temple would have been, or the original temple. And getting that straight, I think, is really challenging. I don't know if you find it challenging, but I think it helped very much, and I hope our lesson and our assignment helps everybody to get that straight.
Well, I do. I think it is really important, and it was very helpful in the video as well. Incredibly helpful. I can now imagine, you know, next time you guys go, joining you, of course.
Well, we love you to join us. Yeah, I mean, I understand now. You know, people would always say, you know, their goal was to go to Jerusalem, and I have to say, I mean, I thought that was lovely, but this is true everywhere you go. It's true if the first time you see the Colorado River, or, you know, the Pacific Ocean. I mean, you can't substitute for seeing something, even in our digital age, ladies and gentlemen. It is still totally different. But I found myself thinking, if I hadn't had this opportunity coming, I would probably not have gotten to Jerusalem. And I mean, maybe, you know, and now I understand why people really work towards it. And it helped me understand pilgrimage better, too. There's a big... I mean, some people are very involved in pilgrimage still, even in our modern times. But boy, the idea of a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, to the Holy Land, suddenly was like pa-boom for me, and I just felt so fortunate to have this happen. For you know, all of these reasons, and of course I don't know what people think about when they think about the destructions of the temples. I mean, is that something that gets taught in Sunday school? Do you think generally to kids? I don't know. It's a big topic. What sense do people have of that, do you think?
That's a good question. I would venture to say, in my own experience, no. Really, we didn't study much about the destructions of the temple and how that applies to everything. We just, you know, we pretty much went along the timeline, so to speak.
Yeah.
But yeah, I didn't get a grasp of that till much later in life.
Yeah, and I think the thing that's been really, I hope comes out in the lesson, and that really is, obviously we're tracing the roots of sacred music. That's what we're trying to do.
Right.
But I think that part of what we want to do is to um, as I say, lay that framework, because most of what we understand about the music comes from our understanding of temple worship. And the temple was everything. I mean, we get that from the New Testament, we get that from the Old Testament. The calls, the hours, going to the temple at the third hour, going to the temple at the 12th, there was constantly a focus around the temple in Jesus' time, in the Old Testament times. And okay, we've all read that, but that the music, the constant procession of the sacrifices, that is something that I think really is helpful to understand, and those 3D recreations helped me to understand what a I don't want to say an industry it was, but think about all the crowd control, okay? Traffic control, the noise of the animals, getting everything in order, all the priests that were needed, and all the musical instruments. See, that was a kind of a surprise to me to become clearer about how the Levites were really very good organizers and musicians, these musicians, these instrumental choirs or ensembles. And just think of I don't want to say a racket because it was very serious and solemn, but think about just the magnificence of it. Yeah?
Yeah, that's great. Well put. How do we? Okay, so there are challenges, like you said, the sounds, the busyness that's there now. Can you get a sense of what that was like when you go there and you kind of, the temple's been destroyed. You have that one wall, correct?
Well, of course, and you have the Dome on the Rock that is just certainly not a place that we're going to be visiting and able to visit. Allowed, it's a complicated history, and I think Yuval does a great job. I forget when it happens in the course of explaining why that Western Wall. Because I always wondered why not the Eastern Wall. I mean, he talked about all the important gates and the Robinson's Arch, and we show a reconstruction of that, and in those 3Ds and the assignments, which again I think those graphics are just astonishing, and you see these animated figures walking in and the priests, and you see where the altar, and you can see where everybody stood, and this is when computer technology is at its most blessed and best, I think. But at any rate, why, with all that going on all these important areas where there were the ritual bathings and this and that, why the Western Wall? And it never made sense to me. I'll just have to tell you. I mean, you see it on the news, the Wailing Wall, all the famous officials, the presidents of the country, everybody comes. But why that wall, when all these others had things too? But to understand that it's the closest you can get to where the Ark of the Covenant was, that is so obvious to people when they're there, to the people that it's like a heartbeat. It struck me that center geographically, because of the history that's there, and it would have been the center and the heartbeat in Jesus' time as well, and that was trying to get snuggled close to the flame, if you will, as close as you possibly, in the tragic circumstances of the politics and political religious strife today, as close as you can get. That's that Western Wall, and that was so, I guess that should have been obvious to me, but it wasn't. Things aren't obvious to me until they're obvious. I don't know how everybody else is doing out there. And then to realize that you can't get to that. And of course, you can never get to that in the Ark of the Covenant. Only a priest once a year. And Yuval was telling us, I don't know if we have that in there, that they would put, and you may know, a lot of people may know this, I didn't know it, they would have a rope on him, like a pulley or something, I don't know how they did it, tied around him in case he had a heart attack or became ill and died in there. I mean, think about that's thinking ahead, isn't it? But in case they had to haul him out because nobody else could go in there, but the high priest. At least that's what he told us. It sounds right to me.
Yeah,
but,
that's true.
Isn't that so different than the world we're in today? You just in our 911 world, the Holy of Holies, and to get as close as you can to it. It's just knocks me out.
We have the history where only certain priests were allowed to be in the presence of the Ark of the Covenant, and so even when they were transporting it, we have the biblical history of two people that went to stop it, or a person that went to stop it, and he expired instantly. And so that was the fear, is well, I don't want to go in and get, if that priest, perhaps he had hidden sin or something, that he wasn't as sanctified as he may have been presented to be, and he passed away. I'm not going in there after him because it's not been given to me to be that person to go into the Holy of Holies. So let's pull him, reel him out, so to speak.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's you don't think about those type of things and how the importance of that setup of the temple. Is it hard? Is it a challenge? With the modern things going on throughout the town. There is it. I want to go and I want to envision exactly how it was, and is it hard with the different places that you guys went in such a short time to sort of kind of blur your eyes a little bit and see it in your mind's eye?
Well, I think the parts that, and again, maybe other people have had very different experiences. I think the parts that are so heavily visited by tourists, which is almost every inch, of course, that's hard because you're thinking, this is really the Garden of Gethsemane? I mean, it's beautiful. But again, one thinks of this, you think of a mountainside with, and it was large for the time, but it's not a very big area. And of course, they don't know, it's still a little bit of approximation. They know that's there, and it's planted with beautiful of olive trees, as beautifully kept, but you sort of envision it. It was an outside remote area, outside of where they could go, and it would have been dark, and it would have, and that's hard to recreate. And there's a church there now, and you sort of have to keep taking things out of your mind. Okay, well, this wouldn't have been there, that wouldn't have been there, those buses wouldn't have been there, that noise wouldn't have been there. But I tell you where I think it really comes out to me the most, and is when you walk through the streets of the old city, and there, those shopkeepers, okay, they now have some electric juicers while they're making, squeezing those pomegranates for that incredible pomegranate juice. Oh my gosh, it was so good. But a whole lot of people were doing it by hand, and I don't know how they did it in ancient times, but they had the pomegranates, and I'm sure they would. But still, those little booths, those kiosks, in the marketplace, like marketplaces anywhere in a world like that. They're some of those. I mean, I wonder if they're even in the same families. You get that sense of the crowded marketplace and the steep up and down and the stones, and you think, wait a minute, these stones have not, in many cases, changed. And you have so much intense population crowded, and the rugs and the this and the that and the spices, the mounds and mounds of spices. I didn't know there were that many spices in the world. Gorgeous to see. And you think, wait a minute, when Jesus was compelled to go through those streets, the Via Dolorosa, the way of mourning, of sadness, you can really, for me at least, you could sense how people would have been looking on, a few sympathetic, somebody going off to be crucified, what was new about that? But, where you could almost reach out, even if you were in the middle of conducting business or what do you call it, doling out spices to a customer, you could practically reach out and touch because it's so small, it's so crowded, and you kind of get that feeling of what it must have been like to be someone on the way to crucifixion, walking through. Ooh, that really got me and has stayed with me, if that makes any sense.
Wow. So. Did you see any of the ancient olive trees? I've seen pictures of some amazing trees there.
Well, the ones that are in the in the important sites are very well kept by gardeners, and of course you have to trim. You have to care for olive trees and vineyards, or they don't produce. I tell you the colors, and of course what was it like in terms of the verdure was very different 2,000 years ago. We know that 4,000 years ago, but still your eyes after a little bit start taking in more and more color. And maybe it's come from living in Texas too. At first, if you're on the East Coast or Colorado or Seattle, you're used to so much vibrancy in the color. I think part of what you take away from the Holy Land is a very different palette of color, and then that makes things like the tapestries, the rugs, the spices, the people kind of pop out. The vividness of life against those beguiling and intricate but still muted colors. It's pretty wonderful. I know now, as I say, why so many people I knew made that a life priority.
Right. Well, you did a great job of talking about the spices and the juices and the market there. I could almost smell it when you were describing it, and that's the one sense that's missing when you watch a documentary.
Yeah.
We do have a question from one of our viewers,
Okay.
and it says that they're asking, when you say things are small, do you mean like a small crowded town or a small crowded city? And second part of the question is, how wide are the streets?
Well, in the old town, they're alleys. You know, if you, I'm trying to think if you've been to like a Renaissance fair or any kind of a bazaar where you just have little, we call them kiosks or cubicles or little market areas carved out, and you know that families would have lived in the back, probably still do. You know, I wonder how many. I should think it was a feet, 10 feet. I'm not so good with that. You know, 12, 14 feet. I mean, pretty narrow because you're constantly going. Well, you know, it's pretty narrow, and those nothing's changed. You know, those gates of the ancient city are right there, and the amount of people that are in there, probably population-wise, is there's probably fewer today than used to be crowded in there. Plus, there would have been the animals. Don't forget all that. I mean, you know, the goats and the whatever else is getting led up and down those paths. So, and you can add some smells in there. Let's, you know, not just spices, okay? Let's not just have spices, as wonderful as those are. There's a few other smells. But so that I think we can get a sense of that if you compare it to a crowded Christmas fair, bazaar, Renaissance fair, where everything's just truly almost touchable. And then the distances, again, I should have thought that through. You know, you're talking in eighths of a mile. I mean, how you could easily be at Mount of Olives and walk wherever you needed to go. I mean, you could walk through. We didn't for all kinds of reasons, including security issues, and that's something, you know, was so great with you all. We had this, I'll have to tell backstage stories, you know, but we met actually that morning. It was so fun. We met really, really early, and I thought, you know, I hope this works out because we're arranging all this on the internet. Everybody can imagine doing that because we do a lot of that in this day and age. And of course, there he was. You know, we were in a hotel outside the city gate. Not far, like a few blocks from the wall, not the wall, but the walls of the city. And we had this wonderful, the breakfasts. There's a reason to go to Jerusalem, is the breakfasts. I'm telling you, I have never seen so many amazing things done with dairy products, olive oil, and hummus, and oh my God, and anyway, never mind. But getting back to the point, and there we were, and we talked through our daily plan, and he looked at our agenda and said, "You really think we can do all this?" We did, but he was very careful when we needed to drive or when we took a break. You know, he said, "Well, we can't go this way." I mean, everybody in Jerusalem, no matter where you fall in this complex web of difficult religious and political interactions, knows very well where the neighborhoods are, and you feel the difference. Oh my goodness, when you change from one district to another district, and it's not even, you know, even if you don't see it, you feel it. It's not because things don't look as nice. It's just, you know, you've changed cultures. It's not really answering the question, but all that happens within footsteps. You can walk 4 minutes and suddenly realize, wait a minute, I'm not in the world I was. I'm not even in the century I was. The language has changed. The areas where there's a number of Russian Jews, lots of Russian Jews, and you're there and you almost think you're in a European city, and then you go somewhere else and you're in the Armenian area, and then you're, you know, in the Muslim area, and then you're back in this area, and then you're in this area. And I just found that staggering, and we hadn't even walked very far. But it certainly keeps life. I mean, you have to be on your toes in a good sense, too. You're just constantly aware of sound and smell and taste and motion. And it can't have been much different in Jesus' day. Jerusalem was a cosmopolitan city, relatively.
Well, how did your journey go? And as we're going to take our journey right now, because I'm wondering how it applies to the sound, and when you think about how ancient the city is, and how ancient the history is, and obviously they did not have DVDs back then. What kind of challenges are there in trying to recreate that sound of 4,000 years ago, of 2,000 years ago, even?
Well, I mean, there's where it's so interesting. This whole adventure for us of trying to trace liturgy, you know, we could fill every wall of everybody's house with books that people have written, mostly fill them, I think, trying to decipher the what we call the linear or the the path, the path from the temple worship, which we know a lot about. I mean, look up how many times music and singing and dancing is mentioned in the Old Testament. I mean, you'll be busy for a long time. We know a lot about the temple, the sacrifice, the important holy days. We know about Shabbat. They know this, they know that. The archaeological record is well, it's pretty well preserved, relatively speaking, about confirming. And we know that those traditions were going until the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. We know. And then we have this horrible slaughter going off again, I'm afraid, but it all kind of, we have the destruction not just of the temple. Hey, it's not just the temple. It's the destruction of a way of life. It's a destruction. It's a scattering of everybody. It's over the next decades, there'll be just a massive cleaning out of Jerusalem, and very few Jews will remain. Christians will be, booted out. I mean, the name will be changed. It's not going to be that place anymore. And the scattering of the Jews and having to take the parts of the temple worship to every part of the world, basically known then, and then how is that going to adapt into a much different environment of the synagogues? But because we know so much about it, and yet you can't say, oh, here's a melody that survived, and look, here's a book of what they sang. There's oral tradition. And so you've got all this information, you've got all this history, you've got archaeological records, and then it still comes down to oral transmission supported by archaeology, if you want to say that, with the work they've done in instruments. But oral transmission, which we talked about last time, oral transmission that we don't have much faith in the modern world. It was the glue. It's the one thing that we'll never be able to say for sure. And yet we have to have total confidence in it.
Well, can you tell me the difference with cantillation and singing? You have your cantors, and they
cantillate.
do such a beautiful job, And tell us about that.
Well, now here's where, again, and in the assignments, I'm always talking about the assignments, but we want everybody to be doing them. We want you to be members of Circles of Scholars, watching all the video class sessions and all the live footage, the location. Someone says you don't have a whole lot of dead footage, live location footage that we have in the course. But it still comes down to doing the assignments, and what we try to do in the assignments is take advantage again of the resources that are there, and that's where we found Cantor Michael. If it were the European pronunciation, you'd say Weiss, but he says Weiss because he's in the United States. And we have featured 2 of his many videos that he creates for his students as he teaches them to chant Torah. And he teaches on very different levels. Some of his levels, he's working with young people preparing for, bar mitzvah. I mean, kids, where it's clear he's talking to 11 and 12-year-olds, which is wonderful because I need to be talked to like an 11 and 12-year-old at this point, right? And then there's others that are much more sophisticated. But what you get, I think, from that is the understanding that, again, oral transmission taught people what the melodies would be, what the patterns would be. You heard it over and over, but you still had to learn to do it yourself. And you would have the text, which was it's Hebrew, and I hope for some people it would be new to go right to left. I mean, that in itself is valuable when you watch these things and get a training video on reading Torah. You say, oh, I don't read Hebrew. Doesn't matter. Forget it, go with the flow and move right to left and after a while it's kind of okay, and yet when the explanations are going left to right, but the actual material's going right to left, I think that's totally cool. And that's how a teacher, would be showing you right to left. But then we see these symbols, we see these what they're called tropes, and we're hearing the patterns that have evolved, and they're different in different regions today. You've got your Sephardic tradition, your Ashkenazi tradition in modern times, modern still meaning quite old. But I think with Cantor Weiss's explanations, to go back to that, we hear these intonations, these pitches, they're patterns, Shema, Elohim, Elohim, you hear how it's done. He's so good because he isolates the symbols, and he what do you call it when you make something like outlined and you can see, and he helps you find them across a group of texts, and then you see me, oh yeah, oh I can, and he has very good pedagogy, wonderful pedagogy, how you practice this and how you make it fluent. I just am so excited that we could share these resources, and he's such a lovely person, and anyway, I get excited about him, and I hope everybody doing it gets excited about him too. I think it opens up our mind. Then we think, why don't we chant everything? And some religious traditions still do. They chant the Psalms. But you asked a simple question, and off I went. Oh, I've never done that before, have I? But it's certainly not a melody. It's not a tune. It's not like singing a hymn. It's a different tradition. Psalms and hymn, psalm cantillation, prayer cantillation, and then, the metered, much more melodic hymns that we'll be looking at in our next class in early sacred music, and how that begins to develop, and then will definitely develop. They're just completely different feelings of expression with very different purposes, I think. Was that an answer?
Yeah, it is an answer, but give me an example of different purposes.
Well, and that's sort of this funny thing about psalmos versus hymnos, if we're going to use the Latin terms or coming out of the Greek. When you put meter and focus, when the melody is sort of carrying the weight in a way, and but really it's when you go into a metrical pattern, dum bum 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 bum. Whenever you've done that, you've left the world of cantillation. Cantillation is, now this is, people will totally tell me this, and this is wrong, what I'm about to say, but it's the best way, I think, to start understanding it. It's deeper, it's more intensive, it takes much more of living it to get the right way to explain it. But I think if we start with thinking about it being a rhythm of prose, because every time we say a sentence, we have a different rhythm. We do not speak this way ever. We do not speak metrically. We talk really quickly, and then we slow down, and we have every possible rhythm. You can't write those down on paper. So to say it's following the rhythm of the text is not only simplistic, but it's not complete enough to understand. I like that the text generate the patterns of pitches and rhythm, but even that doesn't go deeply enough. And I think that's where students of Cantor Weiss and people who train and grow up as little kids, hearing it, and then move to the point where they are, when they hit the age of adulthood, at 12, and can stand up in the temple or in the synagogue and read for the first time as an adult. That's got to be, that is a major step in the training of a Jewish child. It is huge. And it's what Jesus was doing. I think it's so important to remember that he was standing. Of course, he was amazing people with what he was doing too at that age. He wasn't just getting through it the way I'm sure a lot of kids hope to do these days. He had the understanding of the wisest man there. I'd like to have heard him cantillate. I'm getting a little carried away, aren't I? But wouldn't you like to? Because he wasn't just talking. I can promise. What he would have been having full mastery of something that is so reverent. The reverence of hearing text cantillated. You better be quiet.
Right. I think that's a good point. I know people now who recite prayers from the Siddur every single day. And at one point in my life, I would have thought that they were just reciting things because they felt like they had to, or they were just stuck in some sort of pattern. But now I know these people, and I've been with them when they do it. It is all out worship. They recite and cantillate, as you say, in pure worship, and it's really neat to see.
Well, it's something I think we. I don't ever like to say we lack it, because we have things that that are different. I mean, everybody has a pretty rich tradition, I think. But have you ever been able to track a youngster going through preparations for the bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah? Have you had friends that have done that, or maybe some of our other people listening would have? I mean, have you watched that up close and personal, as they say?
No, I haven't. We've done a very much of a I guess you'd say a modified, tremendously version for our oldest as well, because we want to bring back some of that tradition, but I have not.
Yeah.
I've had, when I had very lively friendships with Jewish people when I was young, but my schooling with them sort of, I changed schools,
Hmm.
and before that time, so I was not able to watch it in
Yeah.
action, but I'd like to.
Yeah, and imagine being in a time when everyone, again, I think it's so important. It's just like when we start talking, and we will at our next session about chant.
Mm.
It's the Christian chant tradition. When you hear it all the time, it becomes your soundscape. It becomes your worshipscape. It becomes what goes on in your mind. And I don't know about you, but I think it's a whole lot better to have that kind of cantillated prayer filling my heart rather than the thoughts I've got going on sometimes. I mean, isn't that part of the point of it? It fills you with text and musical pattern and an impetus, and you sort of almost are trying to live through it. And that's praying without ceasing.
Yeah,
Cantillation is, yeah.
right. I'm sorry. Yeah,
No.
you just hit exactly on what we talked about last night. We were talking about our prayers and how they often go off. For me, I'm in prayer. Next thing you know, I'm thinking about some movie or a brochure that I read, or just weird stuff. But these Siddur prayers and various things like that, these songs even, they keep you focused. Even as what we call the Lord's Prayer, it keeps you focused to where you realize when you're doing them, you're not off on these other things, thinking about the fish tank or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, you try, and then you say, oh, the clock needs a new battery. I mean, this is, but and of course they had the same challenge, and I don't know, if somebody said to a child, no, when you learn to do this, your prayers will be more focused. But I'm sure a lot of things are said, and I do agree. You cannot sing or have pitch come out of you passively. You just can't do it. It involves everything about your breath and your posture and your whole focus, and I do think that comes through, I hope, in this unit, both the magnificent elements of the temple, the intimacy of Jerusalem, the personal love that everybody who's there, I mean, and as complex as the shall we say geopolitical religious complexities in that area are, everyone who's there, despite all of the problems, they're there because of the love and reverence for every inch of Jerusalem. And we'll be seeing that more when we talk about Constantine and Helen, his mother, coming back to Jerusalem and finding the sites where all the events in Jesus' life happened, finding the true cross, erecting the basilica over Golgotha, all these things which are so long ago, but what a modern gutsy thing to do, she had the means to do it. But I just think every inch of Jerusalem and every note that was sounded, they're important, they're reverent, they're rooted in a way that we need in this modern life, and we just have to work really hard to try to recreate it.
Okay, so it's a very reverent place, but I just have to ask: Are there cheesy souvenirs there, like I hear about, like
Yeah.
in Rome, when people go to Rome and they can
Hmm.
buy these little, replicas of artifacts? Do they have that in Jerusalem?
Oh yeah, well, marketplaces are always marketplaces, right? I'm sure they were much more practical back then. Nobody's lived, although there's plenty of vegetables and there's plenty of cheeses and there's plenty of everything. I mean, you could certainly live out of that marketplace, and people do. But yeah, there's plenty of cheesy stuff. But well, let me think about that. Did I get anything cheesy there? No, I wanted to eat. When we first got there, and again, I'm sure many people have had this experience. We were in the old city, and we realized we didn't exactly know where the borders of the different, shall we say, regions, and we pretty much knew we wanted to stay kind of in one of a couple of regions because it made sort of sense, let's just say that. We didn't want to wander too far, but we found this little crossroads, and there was a little, I'll never forget this. It was a restaurant, but it was just like two little metal tables, I think, and then two rickety metal chairs, or four rickety metal chairs, and there was nobody around, and there was a menu on. I thought, okay, what happens if you sit down? Is this actually real? And we sat down, and somebody showed up, and then I'm going, okay, I have no clue what to get, and I say I want something authentic, the guy looks at me like, oh yeah, here's another American tourist, right? So, whatever, we point things out. Came the most, truly, if I think about delicious in my life, back to the pomegranate juice, the hummus and the olive oil. Oh my gosh. Anyway, I don't mean to get off of the food again, but I will, I mean, that's been a while ago. I will never forget that. Sitting on it, and it wasn't even, you couldn't even sit because it's the cobblestones, and and people walking by, you could have reached out and just hugged 100 people, without even moving out of your chair. And here we are in these metal chairs, and I do think the eating and the senses of smelling and listening are the great souvenirs. If souvenir is to remember,
Yeah.
that is what I think people need to spend this sometime. Definitely, you can't see it all. I mean, you can, but you can't really take it all in. So that time you can stop and sit and just smell and taste. I think then you can imagine the time of the Old Testament, and you can imagine the time of Jesus, and then you will never, ever, ever lose.
Wow. Well, thank you. Well, there are some wonderful tools that on the internet that you mentioned. Can you help us tell us about some of them?
Well, go to our assignment page and start with those. And the whole Encyclopedia Judaica is available free. That is wonderful. And I think we send some people, I can't remember exactly what terms or something, but that online reference, which is very expensive if you've tried to buy it in physical form, that it's available free. And that it's I mean, there's many biblical resources as well, and concordances and this and that, but between those 3D recreations, which I'm just a great fan of, and we have 2 for you to see, and the fact that you can click into any topic in Encyclopedia Judaica, including the ones we have, and be right at, and there's other resources. I'm sure there is lots of disagreement on, look, it's a contentious world out there in the ancient times, right? And the scholarship is contentious, and you need to be prepared for that. If you go very deeply in this, and we don't go too deeply, but you got to realize that people absolutely disagree on everything. I mean, they disagree on even where the crucifixion or the temple. I mean, not so much the crypt, I'll get this right in a minute. Live format, edit that out, okay? Where the tomb for Christ, there's disagreement about that. You got to be ready for that. But that's the Jewish tradition too, isn't it? Disagreement. What do they say? If you have 2 Jews in a room, you have 3 opinions. Right?
3 opinions, right?
And yes. I come by it in my case ethnically, honestly, from my mother's side, so I'm happy about it.
Wow. Well, thank you. Have you heard of Alfred Edersheim?
Not yet. Tell me.
Okay. Well, he's one. I'm looking at my phone to see specifically the books, but I've had a couple of his books, and they're freely available, because they're, written in the 1800s, so you can get them very easily on Amazon, downloadable, PDFs for free. But he was just an expert, and he's written various volumes about the life and times of Jesus. The Messiah is one of them, and his temple, the ministry and services, and it gives you a really good picture of what Jerusalem was like during the time of Jesus the Messiah.
Yeah, and that 18th century and early 19th century, really starting in the late 18th century, early 19th century, all the way through the 19th century, and increasingly in the early 20th century, we can say, oh, that's old scholarship. They didn't have access to A, B, and C, and D, and all this types of scientific dating that we can do, and carbon dating. No, they didn't. But they lived in Jerusalem in those days didn't have, the bus tourists either, and it didn't have neon sign. Well, it's not in the old city, you don't see that, but in some respects they had a better grip, I think, in some respects, of able to recreate the atmosphere, seems to me. So we shouldn't discount those. Oh yes, things have been learned, much has been found, fragments of many things. We're going to get into more and more of that in the next classes, things that are found in the early 20th century and excavations that give us new insight. True, absolutely true. But the world gets noisier and louder and busier and further away from the kind of atmosphere we can think was more likely true in the Old Testament era. What was the last name of the author again? Why don't you spell it for everybody?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Edersheim, Edersheim. Sheim.
Edersheim. Yeah.
Edersheim. Yeah.
Yeah, everything has something to teach us. Well, I hope people will enjoy this unit. I know they'll enjoy you all. I call him the Crocodile Dundee of our Jerusalem experience. But oh, he had, we just kept the camera on with him, and
Sure,
then
he
it
did a
was.
great job. He's very comfortable, even being on camera and speaking.
Yeah. After
Yeah.
he got used to it, he wasn't too fond at first. He's
Oh,
so used to
really?
teaching. He's a teacher. He's someone who teaches people all day long. And, and I shouldn't tell tales on it. He looked at the mic.
It
People
looks
get,
good.
yeah, people don't like microphones if they're not used to using them. I understand that. But then, after he got rolling, boy, I tell you, it was. And here we have. Oh, look at this one. And I hope everybody can, put it on your list and understand why. At some point in your life, they're not joking. It really is very fine if it's possible to go to the Holy Land. That is a fact. So I'm just very grateful, so grateful that we had that opportunity and could share it.
Sure. Well, we are too. Thank you a lot for having this
Okay.
session even today.
Thank you for everybody, and thank you. Oh, it's fun to hang out. I hope it's fun for people. But the real meat of all this, remember, the hangouts are fun. The meat is in those classes and in the assignments and the vocabulary lists, and we're going to have quizzes, But you don't have to do those. Our adult students never have to take a test, do they? They're free.
Well,
But we're having fun.
yeah, and you mentioned, those of you who are watching this now, share this. It'll be available on the internet. It'll be on YouTube, and I'm sure we'll post it on Professor Carol Facebook page as well. So share it with your friends because they can watch it and they can get interested in the classes as well.
Okay, well, we'll see you next time, and we'll be looking at the first centuries of Christianity in the the Edict of Milan, before Christianity becomes tolerated, and then the official religion. We'll be looking at those centuries and what we know about music and life in the Roman Empire, and how that fosters and changes the development of Christianity. That's where we're headed in the next session.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.